I just opened my third doggy daycare. My wife is always in the Suburban and I needed something that had a bit of presence, but not too much presence. When I looked at the exterior of the Spyder, you can tell this is just not a normal convertible. Look at the rear humps. Look at the body structure. This is a very chic and timeless design compared to some of the more aggressive sports cars. But exterior aside, when you get on the inside of this thing, I have to say this is one of the things that's let me down the most. It is a functional, purposeful interior. It feels like a sports car, don't get me wrong. Everything feels well built and put together, but it does not have a wow factor. And this and a lot of the materials in here look like something that you would find out of an incredibly cheap car, something in the $30,000 price segment. These plastic vents, there's little things here that lack attention to detail that some of the cheaper competition do much better. And when I say cheaper, look at the C8 Corvette. We know that's not going to age the best, but you can see on the interior, there's unique structure in terms of lines, geometry, different material choice, things that intersect and just make you feel like, I'm in a special car. I don't get that ever when I sit in here, and that is a big downer when you're paying over $100,000 for something like this. Now, of course, in Porsche fashion, you don't have to be stuck with the basic generic dashboard design. You can choose your own leathers, you can choose the race text, you can choose the deviated stitching, the leather shift knob, all that stuff you can customize the way that you want. You're just going to pay a lot of money for that privilege. And I think if this is one area that I'm disappointed in this car, and I really hope it doesn't carry over into the drive, it's this space. So before you get all upset about me talking about this because we complain that there's so many gimmicks in newer cars, that's exactly what works well here. In 20 years, this is going to work the same because everything is physical. All these switches, all the individual controls for your PDK mode, your damper mode, your exhaust mode, it's all here right in front of you. You don't have to go through a user interface, a touch screen, or an MMI to go through and change every single setting. That's one of the things I really like about it, but it's also one of the things that makes it super generic. It's not well laid out, it's vastly more cluttered than their newer generation car that I really appreciate on the Macan and the 911. This just doesn't get that treatment, and I feel like there's a better middle ground here that they never implemented. Now, let's talk about the big thing. You want to put the top down. It is an electrical system. However, it's not like a traditional convertible. When you actuate the top down function, it releases the top from here, and then in the back, you actually have to open the trunk or the deck lid in the back to start the process to fold the top down manually into the trunk space, which requires you also to release the little tent latches and all that. It's just such a convoluted process to get the top down and back up. If you're in a crunch or a time crunch, this is not something that's going to take you 20 seconds. So the last thing before we get into the shop is comfort. This cabin feels large for what it is. You look at this car, you're like, oh, that's a tiny little Miata thing, and it's not. You can be any size and fit in here, and I think that's the big thing for someone that is a bit larger. This is an accessible sports car, with the exception of the seats. And as someone that's looking to buy a Porsche product, I look at their standard seats and not their buckets, and I'm like, they're so average in every way. Adjustability's average, the bolstering, it doesn't particularly hold you in well, and I'm comparing this to stuff like things are way cheaper than this. The Civic Type R has better seats, the Miata Recaros, the GT350 and 500 have better seats, and you just don't have a good standard seat option. When you go to a bucket, you have no reclining adjustability, which makes it just a nightmare to use on a daily basis or on longer trips. But, it sounds like I'm complaining about this interior, and I am. It's just because of the price point. But this is really a clean and simple interior to use every day, and it's not a frustrating experience at all. Let's head into the shop, and we're going to talk about the technical attributes of this car. Underneath the 718 Spyder, Jack, and there are a lot of flies in here. It's because this guy left his swordfish dinner in the garbage can for a week. Now I gotta choke on these things.
Nothing but the best for my mama's little boy.
That's right, but we're not looking at a garbage can under here for once. What do we got?
We're underneath the first GT car iteration of the 718 Spyder, or the Boxster Spyder. This is the first time Andreas's team has managed to work on one of these vehicles, which is a big deal. This is the mechanical twin to the 718 GT4. However, there are some key differences specifically in aerodynamics. This shares the same front bumper of the GT4, which means you have larger air intakes for cooling and for the engine in the front. You'll notice it left and right, you have giant heat exchangers up front. However, the front splitter and the rear aero of these cars is different. In the front, you have a smaller front splitter because you do not get the ginormous GT4 wing on this car. However, it has the same rear diffuser, and this produces 50% more downforce than the regular GTS 4-liter, which we did earlier this year.
That's a lot. How do they do that?
Primarily in the underbody paneling. So if you look at this car, everything is covered up, Mark, including the rear where you get NACA ducts for the rear exhaust cooling, and you get these fins in the back, which is actually responsible for 30% of the downforce found on both the GT4.
Just the rear diffuser?
Yes.
Wow. That's crazy.
It's pretty remarkable. A lot of this came from the GT4 Club Sport program they had on the prior generation GT4 and this generation as well.
And you see little things like this, the golf ball style front end, which smooths out airflow. I mean, there's lots of little tricks that they do here, but it just adds up.
Yeah.
Quickly.
It also adds up in price.
Oh.
This car is $109,000 and is lightly equipped. This is a very expensive vehicle. In the front suspension, that's the next unique part about this car, and so is the rear suspension. This is a identical, or largely mechanically identical in the front end to what you find in the 991.2 GT3, which means it's still a strut-style front suspension, but everything is aluminum, and you have ball joint style bushings in this car, which is a harder core variant, which allows you to feel more from the front end. There's less front end deflection, and just like the GT3s, everything is height adjustable, which means you can corner balance this car day one from the factory. The ride height of this car is 30 millimeters lower than a base 718, and it is 10 millimeters lower than a GTS 4-liter.
But the back has a strut style suspension, which has been changed from the previous generation car.
It is very similar to what's found on the prior generation car, but however, it does have some higher grade materials, higher grade bushing designs, and the dampers themselves, again, are specific to the GT4 or 718 Spyder, and it is still height adjustable. Speaking of that, the dampers are PASM dampers, which means they are adaptive. You can either put them in normal or sport. They're built by Bilstein, and they are, let's call it, a little bit on the firm side.
The other thing they do is the adjustable sway bars. There's 3 adjustments, and obviously in front and rear, you can soften up the front, stiffen up the rear for oversteer, or vice versa. The main point is between the alignment capability, the ride height adjustment, and of course the sway bar tuning, you can take this from like a normal kind of cruiser to tailor it to your driving style, and that's what makes this more of a driver's car than some of the vehicles that we see constantly that don't offer any of that. Yes, there's more complication there, there's more setup, but at least you can do it.
Yeah. Speaking of that, let's talk about brakes very quickly. You have 2 different options. This car came on the steel brakes, which are smaller than the carbon ceramics, however much cheaper to replace and honestly good enough. The carbon ceramic rotors can have a higher thermal capacity. They do not dust, but in typical Porsche fashion, they are catastrophically expensive to replace. Before we get this on the track, though, Mark, I want to talk about one other thing, and that is engine. This is mechanically identical to the GTS 4-liter in drivetrain. Gearbox, both the PDK option that this car has and the manual are internally the same. The engine mechanically is identical, which means it still has a forged crank. It's the same engine family, which is the same engine family as the Carrera S, 911 Turbo, 4-cylinder boxer, both the 2-liter and the 2.5, but it does have a dry sump cylinder deactivation, which will vary either the left or right bank depending on conditions, and all of that is sent through either a E-diff in the PDK cars with Porsche torque vectoring or a mechanical diff in the manual cars. The last thing I want to talk about is the manual transmission. The same thing found on the GTS 4-liter, however, the shifter itself is changed for the 718 Spyder and the GT4.
There's a lot of little things that we can talk about when we get into the GT4 as well, because we're going to cover that. Things like brake ducts, why they did strut in the back, helper springs, some of the technical stuff we're going to tease you with then, but I think it's a good time. Let's get this out, drive it, see what it's like on the street or street drive and track.
All right.
.718 Spyder. I am very curious to see how this gets off the line with the PDK jack.
All right, Mark.
Oh, Oh, listen to that engine. Oh, that sounds amazing. Oh, jeez. Oh, yeah.
4-liter, 8,000 RPM. That is a hard recipe to argue with, Mark. That sounds pretty amazing.
It almost, anything that is potentially wrong with this car, and I kind of talked about some of it on the interior, you forget about it pretty quick when you get out here and hustle this thing around. That combined with the open top experience, which this was designed for that, I think it's makes it even more special. And granted, we don't have the top down right now because our audio would be destroyed.
This is what Porsche does best, Mark. They make you work for the driving experience. It doesn't have that instant gratification of a V8 or a turbocharged engine with instantaneous torque. You have to wind this engine out. You have to work with this car, drive it hard to extract the rewards that it'll offer you, and that is a very connected driving experience. Everything feels good about this car. We're going to talk about it more on the track, but the front end loads up. It'll rotate on you a little bit under throttle, it'll rotate under braking, and it doesn't totally annihilate you with a stiff ride.
No, it doesn't. So let's briefly talk about how it is to drive on the street, because that's what we're doing right now. I anticipated this to be very harsh, very noisy, and when we had it out on the highway, between 70 and like 90 miles an hour, absolute joy.
Yeah.
With the windows up and the top down, no buffeting. It is not vibration prone, it's not droning.
No cowl shake.
No cowl shake, and the suspension is just good enough for the daily drive where it's not on the touring car spectrum. It's a little bit firmer, but it doesn't grate on your nerves over longer drives. Obviously the seats is a point of contention for me. I hate the Porsche sports seats. They don't do a good job of, like having a real Recaro. Like even the Recaros and the Miata are way better than this. So it forces you to go to a bucket, and then it ruins your drivability daily. And I feel like this car does such a great job. I'd want to drive it every day. And then really, I don't know what else to complain about.
Let's talk about the gearing, Mark.
Okay.
So one of the points of contention for the 4-liter equipped GTS and the 718 GT4 and Spyder is the long gears. This is a PDK car, and honestly, it has the same problem. It's not really a problem. Every car that I've ever been in that is faster, that is oriented a little bit more towards track work, has the same issue. They have long gears.
Yeah.
My Vet has that problem. The GT350 has that problem. The GT3 has that problem. It's just what you expect now.
Well, even in the PDK, you have 7 gears to work with versus the manual, and this car's not super fast. So the PDK, while it does add a little bit, it's not completely necessary. Like the GT3, I'm like, okay, I gotta have a PDK because you get to hear the engine more. This, I don't feel like the PDK does it, so I'm just gonna accelerate quickly. I'm in second gear, 4,000 RPM at 40 miles an hour. That was 74 miles an hour at the end of second gear. So, even with the PDK, you're not really, although it sounds like it when you're shifting and playing with the paddles, which, let's just be. The PDK is one of the best transmissions on the planet for an automatic. I mean, I'm just going to go up and down the gears briefly here. I'm in third at 3,000 RPM. First, it's like instantaneous.
God, that sounds good. But it's not so fast like the GT3 where it's manic. It has this manic, like, I'm going to go to jail or crash this thing, not because it's dangerous, it's just because it's so fast.
It is fast. It's still a fast car, but it's not of the realm of, you can still have some fun on the street. And I think, speaking of which, Jack, let's see what it's like around Autobahn Country Club, going a little bit more flat out.
All right.
718 Spyder, Jack, PDK. How's it feeling?
I'm going to say this, Mark. All the shortcomings this may have as a street car, it's rough for a ride. It's the fact that you have to work with this engine to extract power. You have to go up to 8,000 RPM to find really what makes this thing so special, all of that pays off out here. This is almost the polar opposite to something like a C8 Corvette, where that has a lot of instant gratification in the way the engine delivers power, the way the car makes you feel more like a driving god than you really are. This vehicle, you have to work at it, and because you have to work at it, it's extremely rewarding.
Yeah, it feels more connected. I know you're supposed to say that about a Porsche product, or at least a 718, but this is the closest thing you can get to a driver's car. You get a manual, you have an amazing automatic transmission, you feel everything that this car is doing. What's the complaints?
Honestly, I don't have a lot. There's not a lot of torque even when you wind this thing out. So if you're looking to slide this thing around, unless you're gonna maybe clutch kick it, particularly with these Sport Cup 2s, you're not gonna be able to do really easy, tremendous power slides. I guess, really, other than that, Mark, it's pretty faultless. It's just a car that you have to wind out. You have to work with its dynamics. This is a car that will trail brake extraordinarily well, as I'm about to demonstrate. It's a car that will also rotate when you lift throttle. So get in here, let off the gas, the car rotates in, power up.
Yeah, it has a lot of confidence, even though you're having to work it, you're having to be more precise
Lift
with this.
comes in.
But it still allows you that, it allows you the comfort zone to know you're not gonna stuff it, but you still have to be really precise, you have to be smooth to really enjoy this car and drive it fast. I think it's accessible to a wide variety of people. Maybe not like the do everything automated supercars now that are coming out. Like you mentioned, the C8, that's a great example of a car that just does everything for you.
This car, you have to work. You have to work within, the available grip, and the fact that this is a car that will also bite you if you screw up. If you lift when you're not supposed to, the back end will come around like it did just right there. It's a car that will bite you if you mess it up, but that's what makes me love driving. The fact that I have to work to get the reward. It's not instant gratification.
I think that's a good time, Jack. Let's head into the final thoughts and kind of sum up everything that we talked about during this video.
All right. Final thoughts on the 718 Spyder. If you are someone who loves cars and loves the act of driving, you are absolutely going to fall in love with this thing. Any car that can wind out to 8,000 RPM and makes peak power at the very top of its power band is something to be celebrated. With naturally aspirated engines going away and everything going towards EV, this is probably a swan song for the Boxster and Cayman. That said, not everything about this car is sunshine and rainbows. Let's talk about price. At $109,000, it's fairly expensive. It may be a relative bargain when compared to its bigger brother, the GT3, but with things like the GT500 out and C8, this might be a tough pill to swallow. Add to the fact that this is not the best daily driver, and unless you are pushing it hard, it's hard to have fun with, may be a big detractor. And there's also another two things. Next, the gearing. Gearing on this car is long, and if you are someone who's looking for a fast and furious driving experience where you're constantly shifting, this is not going to be your car. And the last part, of course, is its interior. If you are someone like Mark and is expecting a more special interior cabin, you may be a bit disappointed. But with all that said, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.